Hi everyone, welcome to today's office hours presentation on there being no STAAR progress measure for the 22-23 school year. We're very glad you're here today, and we're going to talk about some news that might have caused a little bit of stress and a lot of questions. I do want to let you know that it's going to be okay. We do have some options available to us going forward for TIA districts currently using STAAR progress measure. Let's get into the big news. Today, we're going to drill down and really focus on this one specific issue, which is part of the pretest post-test option 1. You may recall seeing this slide before. There are 4 different flavors, if you will, of pretest and post-test. The first one is a third-party test where the third party sets the growth targets, and there's also a third-party post-test. This could be STAAR, Renaissance STAR, iStation, M-Class, NWEA MAP. There's lots of assessments. But today, you can see we're just going to focus on this one little tiny piece called the STAAR Progress Measure because that's what's changed. So that's our focus for today's training. Why is this happening? Why is there no STAAR Progress Measure at all for the 22-23 school year? This seems like a pretty big change. Well, there are several really good reasons for this. First of all, there's a complete redesign of the RLA test, which is now going to encompass writing. There used to be a 4th and 7th grade writing test that was separate from the reading test, and now reading and writing are all going to be on one test, 3rd through 8th grade. The complete redesign of the RLA test is one reason. The second reason is that there are new kinds of item types being rolled out for STAAR, not just in RLA, but also in mathematics, science, and social studies. There is going to be all kinds of item types with less emphasis on multiple choice and more emphasis on other kinds of question types. That's a whole other session that we can talk about later, but that's just one reason why there's not going to be a STAAR progress measure for this upcoming year. And the third reason is this upcoming year is going to be the first time that we've gone fully online to test in the state of Texas. As we know, Texas has been transitioning students completing STAAR tests online over the last few years. And this is going to be completely online for everybody this coming school year. So these 3 things kind of lead up to this bottom bullet where there are new vertical scales for both RLA and mathematics that need to be completely redone. So it's actually not possible to calculate STAAR progress measure this year with them needing to be completely redone. There's not going to be a STAAR progress measure for the 22-23 school year, and I wanted to explain a little bit as to why. The STAAR progress measure is going to be replaced in terms of accountability by something called transition tables that you may or may not have heard of, and we'll talk a little bit more about them in just a second. In addition to STAAR progress measure not being available for the coming school year, it is also being replaced completely as the accountability measure. The accountability measure going forward is not going to be STAAR progress measure anymore. It's going to be transition tables. So we've heard from many districts, and one of the reasons why those districts chose to use STAAR progress measure as part of their TIA system is because they were already having to use it for accountability anyway. Well, now that it's not going to be used as part of accountability, we need to explore other options for those districts. There's all kinds of information on what this new accountability system framework looks like, how it's changed, and why it's changed. The link above will take you to the website to get a broader understanding of the changes to the accountability system. If you click on that link, it will take you to the new accountability system framework, which is on the TEA website and describes the updates to school progress as well as academic growth. TEA is not going to use STAAR progress measure anymore. They're going to be using transition tables. And I do want to remind everyone that we are not the accountability team, we are the TIA team. But we know because so many districts are using STAAR progress measures, since it was previously also used for accountability, it connects. So we just want to flag this for y'all, but we're not experts on accountability. So if you want more information on exactly the nitty-gritty details of the new accountability system, please visit the link above or Google TEA New Accountability System Framework. Many people have also heard that while there's no STAAR progress measure for this school year, it is likely coming back the following year, and that's true. However, even though it comes back and you can use it if you want for reference, it's no longer going to be used for accountability. So that's up to you whether once this year is over and STAAR progress measure comes back, you could choose to use it again. That's a local decision. So I just wanted to flag that for you And although you may have heard it's coming back, that's true, but it's no longer going to be used for accountability. That's just a big FYI. So what do we do if my district uses STAAR Progress Measure for TIA? Well, the good news is you have options. Specifically, you have 4 options. Let's discuss each of these options in detail. Let's talk about what those are and what you can use to replace STAAR Progress Measure in your local designation system for your TIA plan. Here's a list of options, and we will go over each one in detail. As an overview, first of all, you could use transition tables. This is the thing that is replacing STAAR Progress Measure as the new accountability measure statewide. So there is a new accountability measure, and it's called transition tables. TIA districts currently using STAAR Progress could just replace it with transition tables on the Qualtrics survey, and then they're done. That's one option, and we will discuss the pros and cons of that one. Another option is you could say, well, for all of our teachers who were previously measured with STAAR Progress Measure, we want to just calculate growth locally, and we'll talk about what your options are for that. Another option, the third one, is districts could use a previously approved assessment that you're already using. So for instance, if you've been previously approved to use Renaissance Star, iStation, or NWEA MAP, any of these tests, you could say, okay, we're just going to use that instead of STAAR for these teaching groups, which would replace the STAAR Progress Measure. Another option, the fourth one, is to use a completely different student growth measure that was previously approved. For instance, let's say your district is already approved to use portfolios for your CTE teachers. Then you could say, we want to use portfolios for our STAAR Progress Measure teachers as well. You could do that. Or if you have already approved to use SLOs for your world language teachers, you could do your SLOs for your STAAR Progress Measure teachers as well. You can use a different previously approved, completely different growth measure if that's what you want to use in order to replace STAAR Progress Measure. And our last option is there, and we don't think many people are going to select this, but it's an option you could choose to just not include them, to include those teachers in your local designations. Again, we don't think many will select this option, but it is available. Let's now take a look at these options in a little more detail. Okay, so transition tables, that's the first option. We're going to discuss this option in a little bit more depth as it's going to be the new accountability measure starting with the 22-23 school year. It does measure academic growth specifically, which is good. It also adds additional cut points for high and low, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. It's also based on a standard deviation of scale scores, which is a huge perk. Transition tables include additional assessment titles that the STAAR Progress Measure did not include. The new transition table model includes English 1 teachers, which STAAR Progress Measure did not. It also includes students or teachers of students that went from Spanish language reading test to an English language reading test, which STAAR Progress Measure didn't include. It also includes teachers and students who are having to retake one or more STAAR tests. If districts were to choose this option, they could automatically add 3 different teaching categories just by clicking a button in the Qualtrics survey. So that's something to think about if you wanted to choose this option. Looking at the table, you can see what I meant earlier by high and low. So this is a draft from the accountability team and has not been finalized. These points have not been finalized yet, but I'm going to walk you through this just to get a little bit of a sense of exactly what we're talking about when we discuss transition tables. Let's walk through a few examples. So if we look at the column in the prior year, let's say the student was at low did not meet grade level, and then the next year, this current school year, they managed to be a high did not meet grade level. That would be worth 1 point. If they made it up to low approaches, that could be worth 2 points. And if they made it all the way up to high approaches from the low did not meet, they would receive 3 points. So this notion of it's not just one level, there's a high and a low for each level. It really expands the opportunity to demonstrate growth, which is great for TIA since we are all about student growth. Another example, looking at the high approaches grade level column for the prior year, you can see that if high approaches is maintained, the student would be allocated half a point of growth. And they ended up mastering if they end up mastering the grade level, they would be allocated 2 points of growth. Again, I want to point out that these numbers have not been finalized, and TEA is hoping to finalize these in early fall, hopefully by October. This is just an example I was working with to explain transition tables. It's not set in stone by any means, but it is something that's going to be in the order of this. It is going to definitely have this distinction between high and low levels, and what the numbers are may change, but the design of it and the spirit of this example is something that is going to be happening, so we can expand districts' opportunities to show growth for their students. Now, how is this connected to STAAR Progress Measure? What's going to count as meets is likely going to be that 1 point. If you have anywhere on here that there's 1 point, or whatever the final version of this is, if there's 1 point, that's going to count as having met growth. That's just something to think about. And again, we're not the accountability team, we are the TIA team. Please reach out to the accountability team if you have specific questions over the transition tables. But it does connect because so many districts are using STAAR Progress Measure as part of their local designation system. So if you have a really specific question about transition tables, I encourage you to go to the accountability site that I showed earlier, and you can dig in deeply and hopefully get some answers to some of those questions that you may have. So transition tables are actually the recommended option. It's not a required option though. It's recommended because for many districts, it's going to be an easy lift. They'll just move out STAAR Progress and put in transition tables. Districts are going to have to learn about it for accountability anyway, and it also provides to the potential to add additional teaching assignments to your TIA system with very low lift. So we recommend this being a user-friendly sort of option, but again, it's not required. The best part of transition tables is the academic growth piece, like I mentioned earlier. It also includes additional teaching assignments, specifically English 1 teachers, or students who are moving from a Spanish RLA to an English RLA course, and retesters, so that you have lots of opportunity to add some additional teaching assignments. It emphasizes growth even more, which is totally in alliance with TIA and is also transparent and easy to understand. One of the things that we have heard regarding STAAR Progress Measure is how it's calculated. How it's used was very hard to understand for all stakeholders, especially parents. And this transition table model is much more transparent and just easier to understand and explain to all stakeholders. So for all of those reasons, that's what we recommend. But it's your decision which one you pick, and I do want to note that whichever one you pick will be a permanent change to your local designation system. So if you want to replace STAAR Progress Measure with, say, transition tables, it's going to be transition tables as your system from now on. That's a permanent change, and you can't do another option unless you want to change it back, and in that case, you would have to fill out an expansions modifications application. But once the Qualtrics survey is the option is selected, these are all set in stone. This is not just a one-year fix. It is a permanent change to your system. Let's do a scenario. Daffodil ISD currently uses the STAAR Progress Measure for all applicable teachers, and they want to replace it with the transition table models since that will now be used for accountability anyway. But this means adding new teachers they don't currently include. Does Daffodil ISD need to reapply for TIA? No, Daffodil ISD would need to simply fill out the Qualtrics survey indicating they are switching to transition tables and then listing the teacher groups they would now like to include. No expansions and modifications application is necessary. Remember that if a district chooses transition tables, they can now add English 1 teachers as well as teachers who primarily teach students who take 1 or more STAAR retests and Spanish language RLA to English language RLA testers by clicking on the appropriate response in the Qualtrics survey. Once districts have chosen this option, no further action is necessary. A new application does not need to be sent to TIA, and the change will be permanent. If a change from this system needs to happen in the future, then an expansions modification application would need to be filled out. Let's look at this frequently asked question. What if I currently include English 1 teachers using a different student growth measure? Well, on the survey, you can choose 2 options. You could change that student growth measure for English 1 teachers to transition tables, or you can add English 1 teachers if they were not part of your local designation system at the time. This would be a completely local decision. Another frequently asked question that we get is, if I choose to add teachers to STAAR retesters, do I need to update my waiting tab or eligible teachers tab? The good news is that no, You just need to let us know the option you select and we'll make the adjustments on our end. And I do want to note, there will be a process for you to confirm your updated weighting tab to make sure that all of the information that we enter is correct. Let's take a look at the next option. A different option, if you don't want to use transition tables, you can choose to calculate growth locally at the district level. There's lots of ways for districts to do this. There's lots of models, and there's a whole webinar on setting expected growth targets locally. There's also a 2-pager on our website that explains what these models are and a summary of how they work. If you don't want to use transition tables and instead set your growth targets locally, you can certainly do that as an available option. That is additional work for districts as they do have to figure out which growth targets are going to be used, how they work, and explain them to stakeholders, but it is an option. If you want to do that, it does give you control at the local level in your growth targets, but it's additional work and the lift could be heavy based on if you are a smaller or larger district. If you choose this option, like all options, it will be a permanent change to your local designation system. You'll be saying going forward, we are not using STAAR Progress Measure for all teachers that used to be in that group. Instead, we're going to use growth targets set locally, and you can choose to do that. Another option for districts is to use third-party growth targets. So you could, for example, if your district is already approved previously to use a third-party assessment such as iStation or NWEA map or whatever it may be, you could say, well, we're just going to use that instead of STAAR Progress Measure. We already use the particular test anyway, and that already comes with growth targets. We're just going to use that and not use the new transition table. To use this option, you do need to be previously approved to use that test in order to pick this option. But if you're using it, you could replace STAAR Progress Measure with third-party growth targets. Let us know which one it is on the survey and which third-party option you choose. One little caveat to this option. Not all third-party assessments come with expected growth targets. Some of the tests have a pre-test and they have a post-test, but they don't set expected growth targets as part of the test. Some do and some don't. And for certain areas like math and reading, they may have a test, and then for certain areas like biology or social studies, they may not have a test. Another example of this is with the NWEA map test, they set expected growth targets for science, 2nd through 8th grade, but they do not set expected growth targets for biology, although they do have a biology test, which is somewhat confusing. So just be careful if you pick this option. Make sure that the option you're picking actually does in fact set expected growth targets, and then you're good to go. Again, like all of these options, that would mean a permanent change to your local designation system. Districts would permanently be replacing STAAR Progress Measure with, say, NWEA MAP or Renaissance STAR or whatever you pick. Another option is you could use a previously approved student growth measure, a different student growth measure than the one currently being used. So let's say you are previously approved to use portfolios for your welding and performing arts teachers. You could say, well, we want to use portfolios for our STAAR Progress Measure teachers. So for instance, that district may not want to use transition tables since they're more familiar with portfolios, and they would want to transition those over to their STAAR Progress Measure teachers. That's an option. So it just has to be something that you've already been previously approved for. If you're not previously approved for it, you can't use that. But if you were, you can. So that is an option. There's a couple things to think about. If you choose this option, it is recommended that districts strongly engage with teachers because changing from using STAAR Progress Measure to another growth measure could be unfamiliar to them and causing a heavier lift on teachers. Additionally, many of the options require training. You can choose this option, just make sure you do stakeholder engagement and all are aware of the training and the heavy lift that could come with it. And again, like all options, this will be a permanent change to your local designation system if you choose this. And then our last option, which we don't think is going to be very popular, but we want to just name it just in case anyone is considering it. And that's to say, well, we're not going to include any teachers who were previously using STAAR Progress Measure. They're just not going to be a part of the system at all anymore. Some districts may want to consider this, and they may say to themselves, well, everything's coming up so fast. We don't know what we want to do. We don't want to pick something. We really want to take some time on this. We want to move slow before making a decision. So we're just going to pool STAAR Progress Measure teachers. That is an option, But if these teachers were to be added back to the local designation system at a later time, it would require an expansions modifications application. So that's an option. Again, we don't think many people are going to want to choose this, taking teachers out of a system when they were producing and now removing them for a year. It may be a tough sell, but that is totally a local decision. So those are the options that you have. I do want to note that the beginning of the year assessment, STAAR assessment for 2022 will be the release spring 2022 STAAR test. The beginning of the year STAAR test was released in 2020 to provide baseline data during the pandemic. Some TIA districts are using the beginning of the year STAAR assessment, and it will not be a new assessment for this year. It will be the 2020-22 release STAAR. So it's been changed. It's not going to be a unique test anymore. If anyone had any questions about that, it's not going to be a unique test. It will be the same test released in spring of 2022. I just wanted to bring that up as kind of an FYI, and I don't think it's going to affect too many districts, as the end user is really not going to know the difference, but I did want to flag it for you at this time. These next steps are really, really important. Number one, discuss with your stakeholders, especially teachers, especially the affected teachers, about what the changes are and what the proposals are to implement those changes. They're going to want to know, okay, so why did you pick this versus that? Decide on what you want to do. We did send out our guidance to whoever our TIA leaders in your district were already, guidance on what that changes looked like, explanations of all these options that I just went through. The survey link does need to be submitted by September 15th to tell us which option you pick. Those are our next steps. Let's take a look about a question about adding a new eligible teaching assignment. Katrina ISD currently includes only teachers whose growth measure is measured by STAAR Progress Measure, but now wants to include additional teaching assignments like world languages. And can they do this? Yes, they can do this, but it would need to be done through the expansions modifications application. This is not a change you would make using the Qualtrics survey. All expansions and modifications applications are due by April 15th, and all changes using STAAR Progress Measure are due by September 15th. Remember, if you change something on your STAAR Progress Measure Qualtrics survey and you want to change it back, that would need to be submitted by April 15th using the expansions modifications application. Please join us for some of these upcoming trainings: the overview of student growth measures on September 22nd, pre-test post-test on October 6th, student learning objectives or SLOs on October 6th, portfolios on October 19th, and writing quality assessment items on January 18th. Look for invites coming soon. Thank you for joining us today. If you have any additional questions, please reach out to the TIA inbox at tia@tea.texas.org. Thank you and have a great day.